Ethan Cole sprinted down the rain-soaked street, clutching the folder that held the only thing he had left to hope for, his resume. The interview at Axton Dynamics was in 20 minutes, and if he missed it, the last 3 months of preparing would mean nothing. He rehearsed answers in his head, visualizing the polished lobby, the handshake, the moment he would finally step out of the shadow of unemployment. But all of it shattered when he saw her, a woman soaked to the bone, sitting on the curb with one hand pressed to her ankle, and the other trembling around a phone that kept slipping out of her grip. Cars splashed by, ignoring her distress, but Ethan's steps slowed as his conscience twisted painfully. He checked the time again. He had exactly 11 minutes left. The woman tried to stand, failed, and curled in on herself, biting back a cry. Ethan knew he was watching the fork in his life form before him. Walk away and keep the only chance he had left, or stop and help a stranger at the cost of everything he'd been fighting for. He didn't even remember making the final decision. His feet simply carried him toward her. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, breath hitching. She'd slipped on the wet pavement, twisted her ankle, and her phone had died mid-call. Ethan helped her up carefully, shielding her from passing cars, guiding her to a nearby bench under an awning. When she winced, he realized she couldn't walk. A taxi passed but didn't stop. He saw the minutes slipping away like drops down the gutter. "You need a hospital," he said. She protested weakly, insisting she didn't want to trouble anyone, but he was already waving down another cab. When one finally stopped, he helped her inside, then climbed in after her without thinking. As the cab pulled away, the time on his phone glared at him mercilessly. Den 06 interview. At 10:15:30, minutes across town. Impossible. The woman apologized through tears, saying she didn't mean to ruin his day, and he forced a smile even as his chest tightened. "Don't worry about it," he said. "You needed help. That's all that matters." The cab sped toward the hospital, his dreams dissolving with each passing block. But something deep inside him whispered that sometimes the right thing didn't look like the smart thing until later, much later. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and coffee, an odd mix Ethan had come to know too well from the years his mother had been in and out of wards. He helped the woman, whose name he learned was Lena Hart, to the reception desk. She was embarrassed, apologizing for everything, from the slippery sidewalk to his soaked clothes. Ethan brushed it off with an easy smile he didn't feel, especially as he glanced at the time. Again, 10:31, the interview had begun without him. His stomach dropped, but he pushed the feeling down. There would be time to grieve his failure later. For now, Lena was trembling and hurting, and his instincts wouldn't let him leave her alone. After settling her into a chair, he filled out the admission form, since her hands shook too much. She watched him quietly, as if she couldn't understand why someone would bother this much for a stranger. When the nurse called her in, she squeezed his hand once before being taken down the hallway. Ethan sank into a plastic chair, wiped the rain from his face, and stared at the resume in his lap. "You're an idiot," he muttered to himself, but he knew he would do it again. After 20 minutes, Lena reappeared with a nurse supporting her. A sprained ankle, nothing broken. Relief flashed across her features when she saw Ethan still there. "You stayed?" she asked softly, as though the idea itself was foreign. "Of course," he replied. She insisted she could take a cab home, but Ethan shook his head, saying he'd make sure she got to her apartment safely. She seemed to study him with an expression caught between curiosity and gratitude. On the ride back to her building, an upscale place he'd never imagined affording, she asked him why he was in such a rush earlier. Ethan hesitated, then told her about the interview. Her face paled. "Ethan, you should have gone. You didn't need to do all this for me." He shrugged. "You were hurt. They'll have other jobs. You only have one ankle." She laughed at that, an unexpectedly warm, musical sound that made him feel lighter for a moment. When they arrived at her building, she insisted on taking his number so she could repay him somehow. Ethan told her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. After helping her inside and accepting her repeated thanks, Ethan finally walked out into the now clearing afternoon. feeling the weight of reality settle on his shoulders. He didn't know how he'd explain missing the interview to his landlord, or to himself. He boarded a bus home, resume still damp, future still uncertain. But even then, he had no idea that the hours ahead would rewrite everything. He believed about fate, the apartment. He returned to felt even smaller than usual, peeling paint, buzzing fridge, the faint smell of damp from the endless autumn rain. Ethan dropped his resume on the counter and sat heavily on the couch. The exhaustion hit him all at once. He allowed himself 5 minutes to stare at the ceiling before pulling out his laptop to draft an apology, email to Axton Dynamics. He composed and deleted message after message, struggling to find words that didn't sound like excuses. Eventually, he sent a simple, honest explanation. I stopped to help an injured woman who could not reach help on her own. He doubted anyone would care, but he had nothing else left but the truth. Hours dragged by. He made coffee. He paced. He checked his email compulsively. Nothing. Late. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds. When his phone vibrated with an unknown number, his heart raced as he answered. Mr. Cole? A calm, professional voice said, "This is HR from Axton Dynamics. Are you available for a brief call?" He nearly dropped the phone. The woman continued, explaining that his email had reached the hiring committee, and while missing an interview was highly unusual, the CEO herself had asked to meet the candidate, who chose compassion over personal gain. Ethan blinked. "The CEO?" he repeated, thinking he misheard. "Yes," the HR manager said. "Ms. Hart asked for you." Personally, his breath caught. Hart. Lena Hart, but no, this must be a coincidence. He was told to come in the next morning. When the call ended, he stood there in the middle of his living room, stunned, wondering how helping a stranger had turned into this twist of fate. The next morning, he arrived at Axton's towering glass headquarters, his nerves stretched tight. He expected a stern panel, harsh questions, perhaps skepticism. Instead, he was escorted to a private top-floor office. When the door swung open, Lena Hart was standing there, elegant now, composed, wearing a navy suit instead of hospital scrubs and rain-soaked clothes. She smiled as though she'd been waiting for this moment. "Ethan," she said warmly, "I believe we have some unfinished business." His jaw dropped. You're the CEO?" She nodded. "Co-CEO technically, but yes. And you, Mr. Cole, missed an interview to help me when you didn't know a thing about who I was." Ethan felt his face heat. "Anyone would have helped," he said automatically. Lena arched a brow. "Except no one did, except you." She walked closer, her expression softening. "Sit. We need to talk about your future." Ethan sat, pulse hammering, realizing that the universe had done something impossible. It had turned an act of kindness into a doorway he never expected. The office was breathtaking, floor to ceiling, windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture, a soft humming from the air system that somehow made the room feel both futuristic and peaceful. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of a leather chair, trying not to look as overwhelmed as he felt. Lena took her seat across from him, crossing her legs neatly, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to make one thing clear. This isn't an interrogation. I'm not here to test you. I'm here to understand you." Ethan wasn't sure that made him feel better. Somehow it made the moment heavier. She asked him to tell her about himself, his work history, his goals, why he was drawn to Axton. But unlike typical interviews, she didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't even take notes. She listened. Really listened. When he finished, she said softly, "You know, most candidates arrive rehearsed, polished, perfect on paper, but very few reveal character outside of a resume." Ethan swallowed. "I didn't expect today," he admitted. "I didn't expect you to be your new boss," she said, amused. "Neither did you this morning." The conversation shifted. She told him about her own early career, how she'd once been overlooked for promotions because she was too young, how she'd built her leadership philosophy around humanity first, strategy second. "Axton is large," she said, "but its heart is still shaped by its people. And we need more people who show integrity before ambition. Ethan blinked. You barely know me. I know enough, she replied. You sacrificed the opportunity to change your future because someone needed help. You didn't do it for recognition. That's exactly the kind of person I want. Here, she then stood and gestured toward the window, inviting him to join her. As they looked out over the city together, she said, Most people define success by what they're willing to do to get ahead. I define it by what someone refuses to compromise, even when no one is watching. Her words struck something deep in him. He'd spent months feeling invisible, like the world didn't care what kind of man he was as long as he had the right certificates and experience. But here, suddenly, character meant something. Ethan, she continued, turning to face him fully, I want you at Axton, not because you missed your interview, but because of why you missed it. He felt heat behind his eyes, but blinked it away. What position? He asked carefully. She smiled slowly. Not entry level, that's for sure. I'm offering you a junior operations coordinator role, with mentorship directly under my division. He stared at her, stunned. Why? Because potential, she said, deserves to be invested in. And in that moment, Ethan realized he wasn't in an interview at all. He was being invited into a future someone finally believed he was worthy. Of the first weeks at Axton felt surreal for Ethan. He was surrounded by brilliant minds, fast-paced projects, and an environment that pushed him to grow every day. But what surprised him most was how often Lena checked in on him, not as a CEO towering over her employee, but as someone genuinely invested in his success. She introduced him to teams, gave him projects that challenged him, and even asked for his opinions during meetings, something he'd never experienced in previous jobs. People whispered about how the new guy had caught the CEO's attention so quickly, but Ethan ignored the speculation. He focused on the work, determined to prove he deserved the chance she'd given him. One evening, after a long day, he was gathering his things when Lena appeared at his cubicle. Walk with me? She asked. They ended up on the rooftop terrace, overlooking the city glittering below. A crisp breeze swept through as she leaned on the railing. You've adapted quickly, she said. I'm impressed. I'm just trying not to let you down, he replied honestly. She turned to him, her expression softening. You couldn't. You don't owe me anything. Ethan, I gave you the opportunity because you earned it the moment you chose. Humanity over ambition, he considered that. Still, he said quietly, I want to become someone worthy of the version of me you seem to see. She smiled at that, a warm, genuine smile. For a moment, neither spoke. The city buzzed beneath them, car horns blending with the hum of office lights. You know, she said finally, sometimes the biggest changes in our lives happen in the smallest, most unexpected moments. A wrong turn, a missed meeting, a stranger who needed help. Ethan glanced at her. Do you believe in fate? I believe in choices, she replied. But I also believe life rewards the right ones. Their eyes met. Something unspoken but gentle passed between them. Not romance, not obligation, but a deep mutual respect that felt almost like the beginning of something bigger. Over the next few months, Ethan rose quickly. His dedication, empathy, and steady leadership made him someone people naturally trusted. Lena wasn't easy on him. She pushed him, challenged him, but always with the same unwavering belief that he could rise to meet anything she placed before him. And every time he felt uncertain, he remembered that rainy morning and how everything changed because he'd refused to walk away from a stranger in need. 1 year later, standing in the same office where his unexpected journey began, Lena handed him a promotion letter. Congratulations, Ethan, she said. You're ready for this. He looked at the title, Senior Operations Manager, and felt a swell of pride he'd never known. Thank you, he said. For believing in me? Lena shook her head gently. You made one good choice, she said. The rest? You earned. And Ethan realized then that some moments, some choices, reshape a life forever. That morning in the rain had seemed like a loss. Instead, it became the beginning of everything he'd been waiting for.